Okay, today I'm with Chris Nott and Dave Needham from Kallidus, an interesting company with an interesting domain. I've been into HR as well, but um, I'll let you explain what you do over there. So Chris Nott is a senior team lead at Kallidus, and Dave Needham is a senior developer. And as far as understood, generally noisy about development processes and code and stuff like that. But I guess I'll let you explain what you exactly do. Hi guys, sorry, I didn't say hello.
Hi.
No, I'm scared about the size of my head compared to yours. But...
So yeah, thanks very much for having us. I can tell you a little bit about me and Kallidus, as you say. My name's Chris Nott. I'm a senior team lead, and I lead our development team for our Perform product. So Kallidus supplies software across the so-called HCM sector, which is not a term I particularly like, but human capital management, lovely, isn't it?
Oh.
We have a host of products right across that, from recruitment, from employee record management, learning management, performance management, 360 feedback, talent management, and succession planning. And we also offer content as well for e-learning. So as well as the system to manage your learning, we provide content as well, both off the shelf and bespoke. We do some quite cool gamified kind of content. We've got a raft of customers who really take full advantage of some of that really quite cool content to engage their employees, and that's what we're about. We're about great user experience, and trying to encourage employees to use some of this stuff, because let's face it, it's a bit of a dry topic, a lot of it, isn't it, really? HR, in many people's eyes. So yeah, Perform is the one we're responsible for, or we work on, and that's all around performance management, annual reviews, objective setting, development, developments of employees in developing their skills, their careers, and yeah, so that's the product we're going to talk about today, and that's where we use EventStore in the main. It's the one product we use it for.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm Dave, senior dev. So my life at Kallidus has effectively been this product, because when I came in, the idea was that it was developed as a new product. So I worked with an excellent ex-Microsoft guy, myself spearheading that campaign to get it working. And that was actually about 6 years ago. So we've been using the EventStore database for 6 years successfully now. It was it was quite interesting. When we came in, the idea was to build on the existing DDD framework that was written. But when we came in, the DDD framework, when we looked at it, it very much seemed to be stuck in the past, and we wanted to go a different route, exploring microservices and breaking things down a lot more. It wasn't componentized.
Yeah, it was very monolithic, wasn't it? Very monolithic.
It was very, yes. There were proposals, 3 different proposals of different architectures to use, one of which was taking existing stuff and improving that. There was, and then the sort of counter one that we came up with was a bit radical, a bit more radical than the business could cope with. So it ended up that we didn't go with a monolith. We did go for a microservices-based system, but we didn't go for the sort of Signal R type and service bus type infrastructure, and instead went for a compromise of our own microservices and used EventStore to give us the advantages of eventing for the first time in the company, because the idea of eventing was quite powerful, but because we weren't going service bus, it did provide quite a lot of capability to get us started in that area and to put some of the right things in place with workers or producers, or many things people call them, feeding off the events. Interestingly, the architects at the time didn't like the idea that the event store was a common event store across the microservices. It was a clear architectural decision. But the problem is, unless you have that, you don't start to gain the advantages of flexibility with the things that feed off the events. If you have to subscribe to 12 different databases, it doesn't make it that much sense. So in some ways, in microservice terms, that's not desirable to have the common database. You tend to try and shard them, but we went for that because it just made life easier. The advantages were greater than the disadvantages that we could see, which is the case of most software decisions, isn't it?
Yep. That's still inside the same application set of boundaries, all those services then.
Yeah.
It's not that it's completely disparate kind of domain or something where you use the same database.
No, that's right. It's all interrelated, for the same end client application.
Yep.
Yes, we've got the microservices talk to each other, and we have an internal set of microservices that do the core work, and then a wrapping that provides the HTTP exposure. Because we kept our microservices separated from HTTP on purpose, so that we could at any time shift it to another architecture.
Yeah.
Because it is regarded as it wasn't, possibly as advanced as it could be. So we're trying to leave those options open. So we've protected the internal services from becoming HTTP dependent. Giving us flexibility, so hopefully that'll make the product last a lot longer.
Yeah.
To put some, it was quite funny at first though, because the company has everything based on SQL, and the initial pushback we got was, well, it has to have a SQL database. So there's a bit of a battle to try and get in EventStore. It's just the culture and what people were used to, but they did take it on. So we went with it to see if we can make it work.
Yeah.
and we have. I'll probably give you some stats about where we are now. Might be helpful. Because we're always interested in giving those out, because it's very hard to know how we compare with anyone else that's using EventStore volume-wise, and it's quite fascinating. So we have been running for 6 years. We've got a 3-node cluster, which the clustering's worked fine the way it's supposed to. We did mess it up at one point ourselves, but that was our own fault. So your support team were very helpful in helping us get to that. But that's given us a very high uptime, actually. We've had very little downtime in EventStore.
Yeah, very good.
We had the main problems I had with it actually were more around the projections, where we hardly used projections and tried not to use them because they're experimental in version 5, pretty much. Or well, in version 4, for sure. We started on version 4 years ago. We literally just had one projection, which was for audit. So you could see everything a person had done themselves.
Yeah.
And that's the primary audit thing. And it was a great piece of code to write, because it was so simple, the code you look at. It just had a little bit of rendering, and it can jump around the different streams, looking at other streams with hyperlinks. But it was such a small piece of code. It was wonderful because it's native in the streams. It's very easy to do.
And that's been extremely powerful from a kind of a support maintenance point of view. Being able to offload that and provide it to our support team. When queries come in, and you get a customer saying, "Oh, this, this has happened," and I don't understand. And they can go off themselves and look at it, with a bit of guidance from us initially, obviously, but they can go off and look at it themselves and say, well, actually, I can see exactly what happened here. I've got the history,
Oh yeah, that's all we know. Yeah, but you did this and this and this and then this. That's what we keep as information.
Yeah, I do like that. That's something you just don't get with some more traditional stuff, unless audit's frustrating because it's always bolted on the end of a project. Because it's bolted on the end, it never gets done as a first deliverable. Very rarely in my experience.
Or at all sometimes.
I've been in project where we did that, where we did, traditional relational database-based project where we did think about audit firsthand, but it kind of, as time goes by, it's less taken care of, and it's a feature like the rest. But audit. Oh yeah, we need audit. Oh yeah, we need to change the audit, and it's not. You need to keep that in sync, and it's difficult, I think, in such systems.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think often people only see the value in audit when they need audit, by which time it can be too late, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
In a traditional system.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, it gets pretty massive and hard to query as an extra bolt-on. I mean, you emphasize your SQL database and you emphasize your audit one. It does get quite scary.
Yeah.
So that's one aspect that's been quite good. We've not just got the 3-node cluster though. We actually have a couple of other event stores. We've got one for anonymization. So we do a simple process of picking up all the events that we create for our application and feeding them into a database and just anonymizing the text as we go. That means we can restore that and do very good performance testing and realistic testing against effectively the live database, which when it comes to it is what you want, but not on the actual live database. So that allows us to do it legally. So that's fine. That just ticks over and carries on. Then we've got a separate database as well, which more is in the last year and a half, we're getting concerned about database size and GDPR, etc.
Yep.
So in that case, we took something similar to the anonymizer, but instead of streaming the events and anonymizing them, we actually just clone them to another database. So initially, the idea was just to copy them over. But of course, the big wins in it are when you start being able to get rid of customers that have left, that type of thing. And you can do whatever manipulation you want. So we're using it to fix some data, to get rid of data that we don't need anymore. Because we do, interestingly, we use EventStore for a certain amount of indexing. We haven't got secondary storage for indexes, because it's quite an interesting challenge of how you do indexing in EventStore. If you do it right, it can be very good. If you do it wrong, it can be very bad. So, for example, we started off really badly where we had an index of every single person in the database that was looked up all the time. And that hit its limit, of course, because we had it all in the same stream. It was just getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And we learned to split the indexes into, it doesn't matter how many streams you create. So one part of an index is, if you can find a point index with a key, it's really good. If you need an index list lookup, then EventStore is not brilliant for that.
Yep.
But we haven't had to go to another storage. So the ones we've got at the moment are okay. Yep. Does that make sense? Because if you've got an ever increasing stream, you can't clear down easily because it's sort of static index, because it's not based on time that you can get rid of, then it does just get larger. And if you're dealing with 70,000 people all very busy doing things, you've got to be careful.
We've had that has caused us issues, hasn't it? In the past, we've had an example where we had one of those lookups which was just creating a huge amount, taking up a huge amount of network bandwidth between the server, at that time the server hosting the service, and EventStore, thus just eating up so much of available network, caused performance problems across then all our other services. So then we had to, the team pulled together and we had to quickly, reorganize the indexes, come up with a new strategy, really reorganize, re-implement, replay. And we got all that done over, a couple of days, over a weekend. Resolved it, and then bang, it was perfect again, great to go, good to go.
The trick is finding a way to shard the index into separate streams. But I mean, we've effectively done that, and we still haven't been forced to go to a third party. So it doesn't feel entirely comfortable doing indexes in it. Yeah, but it works quite well.
I must admit, sorry, Yves, I was just going to say, I've been leading the team for, I don't know, how long is it taken now? Getting on for 3 years. So I wasn't in it from the start with the conception. And when I first came and I was getting more familiar with the architecture, I was like, you've got your lookups, your indexes in EventStore. That doesn't feel right. I was dead against it. But actually, as time's gone on, I'm more comfortable with it because it does work. Obviously, and you take something that works and you look at the limits. It's been fine.
Yeah, it's interesting. You did that change of indexing in the system in a few days, and how did that go into production? I mean, do you have like blue-green type of deployments, or?
what we do is, oh, you go, Chris.
Yeah, go on, Dave. You
This is normal for us. I'm normally talking over people. What we do is we decide what the new index is going to be, and then we've got what we call a support task that we can deploy, and that is for when we need to change things, and it's a one-off runner. So what we do, we code the new index into that, and then we deploy it. And what it does, it will then create the new index and deal with that side of it, of catching it up. And then we'll deploy the code to switch over to it becoming a live index that's maintained by the running code.
Yep.
So that's the process we've got. So our support tasking has been a very important aspect of our architecture, because we need to do certain conversions, etc. And that's a runner that allows us to do those type of things as one-offs. And we leave the code in there to a degree to try and have patterns to make things easy the next time. Some of them we use multiple times, some of them once only.
That's right. It's like one of the tools we have to help us, maintain, upgrade, modify as we're going along. And as you say, you especially said blue-green. Yeah, we have zero downtime rolling deployments for all our services, obviously. So once that process has spun through, replayed and done everything it needs to do, we can just then deploy the code, switches over seamlessly. And then obviously some later date on occasion, we might have some cleanup to do of some obsolete code or something else. But yeah, always backward compatible, trying to follow those CI/CD industry standard practices really to give us safe and confident releases. Roll forward, roll forward, roll forward.
Well, our team seems quite comfortable with that process.
Yep.
It seems to become quite bedded in and natural. I guess, the other things, we actually read just a little point there about where we deploy to. We're currently still deploying to VMs at the moment, but our company has done some Kubernetes infrastructure. So we're looking to utilize that soon, and just the blockages. We're not quite on .NET Core. We've got all our NuGets on .NET Core, but we haven't quite got our components. And so we're just moving to that phase of it. And then with that, we can use the containerization, which is quite nice.
Yeah.
Which will make it even more easier to do those switching of versions.
Absolutely. Yeah, we can't wait, to be honest. It's as ever, in a development team, you've got a number of stakeholders, including yourselves, really, and you have to balance all the requests, all the requirements, the business requirements for feature work, other key technical things like making sure we're keeping on top of upgrades, upgrading EventStore and EventStore client upgrades, getting all that done as well as then getting just stuff that we want to do. And there's a whole, we're techies, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff we want to do. And it's,
but balancing that to the need of the organization itself.
That's right.
So I guess there's a lot of discussion with the organization itself, the more business part of the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's my job, and that's I try and let Dave and the others in the team get on with doing the stuff they want to be doing.
Yeah. Chris has to protect the balance between the business and the hygiene we have as a team of keeping ourselves in a good state, and the innovation we can do. And Chris has to try and dance that path. It's hard because everybody's frustrated and wants more. The business wants more. We want more hygiene. We want more tech. We want more innovation. So there's a sort of nice warfare.
Yeah, true.
Warfare with very nice rules going on about resources.
Okay, in amongst all that, I still want to try and keep doing some coding as well.
Yes. I'm actually really lucky. Chris is a manager who enjoys the code as well still. And he seems capable of doing his management stuff and being able to have really good conversations with me in detail, which is not common in my experience.
That's not common. I've been working with people who are okay. It's not on the topic of this conversation, but anyway, I think if anyone has on this team someone who is capable of and listening to the organization and listening to the IT part, let's say, and can bridge that's real asset for everybody. at least. So that's it's kind of a strange role that doesn't have a name, but you know, bridge or whatever. I don't know how we should call that, but that's really important.
Well, and it's very much those type of relationships that keep people working in companies. Those type of relationships. I've got so many friends who do work in places, and their management is not very helpful. They've got very much their own thing of their own management survival as a priority. But anyway, so that's all good fun. So I'm lucky.
That's enough about me.
Yeah. Back to EventStore. We'll get back to it.
No, it's about you guys. It's not about EventStore.
So trying to give you a feel of size of our database, or how pathetically small it is, which I don't know. Looking for feedback from anybody who can tell me. I did check the number of events, and I think we've got about 59 million events. We're adding about 4 million a month, which is 129,000 a day. Which I don't think, I would have thought other people use a lot more events. I don't know. It depends on what they're doing. But what's your feedback there?
It really depends. I've seen people having billions of events and people having way less than you do. I have a system in production today, which for a few years, which probably has even less. But the size or the number of the size of the data is not important. I mean, it's the value of the data. Because there's one thing, but that has to do with messaging. Is like I had a talk once where I talk about things that went wrong, and it was in logistics, and we got one client sending us one producer of data, external producer, pushing us millions and millions of things, the same thing, and kind of brought everything down. But the thing is, we needed to catch up for the rest of the customers. And people were like saying, no, we need this one because there's 100,000 events and here we have one. Yeah, but those 100,000 events are worth $1. That one is worth 1 million. Maybe that one first, if we can do it. I mean, the other one is as important, but it's kind of it's not only monetary value. There's other kind of value. So I don't think the size is something. I mean, the size brings its own technical problems and things that you need to cope with, and probably go deeper into technical tricks to get the most of the most performance system possible. But the value of the information is more important than how much you have.
Yes, and on ours we've got 15. Effectively, what our event store is used for is to maintain about 15 domain objects, effectively, primary domain objects, which means that all of our events are very interactive. They're all high value in that sense because they're part of that domain. That's part of the business domain directly. I guess you've got some other systems probably that just ingest a huge amount of data. That's just a stream of data, which is a very different use case. Whereas we're actually trying to have an application with fairly complex requirements in those domains and trying to put it inside the event store. So I think an interesting example of a domain-driven architecture in that sense.
Yep.
It's actually 190 gig. Vague interest, which is interesting because. We do look at the size and keep an eye on that. One, because the virtual machines run out of space, but more interestingly is the whole uniqueness of event sourcing and dealing with the full history. And I'd say it's one of the mistakes we actually made. It's an interesting learning point in that when we've designed these objects, we have a concept of deletion, which is where we just have a deletion event. And then we effectively stop building the domain object and set it to null. But we don't do any clearance. So one thing we didn't do, and we actually went on one of your courses actually, and talking about event design, and that was very useful. It brought back the one important thing is that you've got to allow for how long is that data going to last? Because really, if you just leave it there forever, it's not really useful. You've got every application has a shelf life with the things it has. Like our people are doing reviews. The reviews last a certain amount of time. They're closed. A period of time after that, nobody's really interested in them much.
Yep.
They don't need to be part of the active system. They could be in something much more offline. So they can still be referred to, but they become sort of largely irrelevant. But we didn't put that in it.
Yep.
So we haven't got there in a model. We haven't got a model of any sort of life cycle where we can actually start to make the data less important and then not important and get rid of it, which is a phase we've got coming up. So I definitely say we made a mistake on that one, but which means we've got 190 gig and we could probably have a lot less, because if you looked at what was active versus what was inactive in our system, we've got 6 years worth. I doubt too much is active more than 3 years at the most. So possibly half of that, although we keep going. The curve of how much we're getting just keeps going up. Our company's doing very well, keeps getting more customers, and they're sort of accelerating in the amount of data we get.
Yeah.
But it does mean that 190 gig is not insignificant, for sure.
It is. I mean, again, it's not about the size. It's about what you do with this information, and
Yes.
Again, the value now and the value later, because even I mean, even if you say, okay, we remove that from the active system, it doesn't mean that you can't transform it, get it out of the system, transform it, and keep it for, doing other type of analysis around them. I've seen that in again, similar domain, but on the recruitment and selection part, where so people take tests. So we have a huge amount of personality tests, abstract reasoning, questions and answer. Having that data almost since it's being done on computer allows to have quite interesting evidence-based information that psychologists just love to use. But I mean, it's fully anonymized, and that data is not. But it still serves a purpose, but not the primary purpose, not the original one. That's interesting about moving data out of the system, because how does the organization react to that? I mean, users like, oh, we are going to remove that information from the system. How because every time I kind of tell that to business people or analysts, they're like, huh? What? Removing data from the system? Why? No, we will need it.
Yeah, I think it's. I wasn't thinking as much from removing it. What I was thinking of doing. The idea is more removing it from the active area. So, in other words, at the moment, our indexes, for example, go back to the beginning of time, whereas the active indexes don't necessarily need to go back to the beginning of time, which will speed them up inevitably. At some point, they're just going to get bigger and bigger, and we're going to have to do something to reduce that. And there may be our ways of presenting the customer with this period's reviews, for example, and sharding your stream so that the period's included in that sharding. I'm not sure sharding is the right word to use, but it seems like the one people are familiar with.
Some kind of partitioning.
Partitioning. And we could partition by something like that. Although, our customers are very different. We have dynamic reviews, and then we have ones that just go every year. So we have to cater for both somehow. We haven't quite looked at that. But the concept's there that we should be able to do that to dramatically change our performance effectively. That would dramatically change our performance. So we haven't had to yet, So at the moment, we've got it nice and simple. It does them all, and it still works.
But I mean, that's letting the system evolve, and I mean, I'm not sure you made a mistake there, to be honest. That's just the system evolves, and you're seeing how is it used, and when you need it, you build it, or you look at it. Hopefully, the current system is not too.
Well, the mistake is we didn't realize how important that concept would be in the first place.
Okay.
Maybe the mistake is that, the advice is, if you ever create an event stream, look at the events and see if they do have a life cycle, and make sure you put that life cycle in some ways between the active and non-active. That's really going to help you.
That's an important tip.
Yeah, because Event Store, it doesn't matter if 90% of your data is not used in Event Store. It doesn't affect performance necessarily, but the like the whole domain streams don't matter. But things like the indexes are the critical things really for that, and you definitely need to start thinking about that and to have those sort of terms.
Nice.
So that's interesting. And it's interesting. It's like learning how to deal with the sort of worker architecture, where you have something running and it receives events. And so we've got the classic ones. We've got classic models where we have one that sits there waiting for emails, triggers for email, for example, and then triggering off emails. We've got, and some of them require state because the events don't have everything in, so they have to build up some sort of state. And we found an interesting compromise there. Initially, we went with the ideal, everything we needed that couldn't derive from the events use state, because that's the most performant thing off the event store. So you're offloading as much as possible. But we found that when it came to they were trying to build state that was fairly complicated, we were just repeating the domain objects again to a degree, and that sometimes we had to use the domain objects as well, because, for example, if you're sending an email to someone, you want to make sure you've got their latest email address. If you're just building up state, you've got their email address from 6 months ago, if you're running it 6 months ago, if you're behind by 6 months, for example. So there's an interesting thing where originally we had that sort of purist thing with just state, and then realized there's some pragmatic reasons you sometimes have to interrogate your domain objects. Sometimes just to have simpler code as a pragmatic thing. But you are loading more on the event store, and it's a very careful balance between the two. So I started off more idealistic there, and there's much more pragmatic level that's come into play there. So those are sort of typical consumers. And we've got about, how many of them? We've got 12 of them that just do interesting stuff, really. Not too much to say in terms of that, apart from the one different variation that's interesting is when you have to deal with timed events. So we've got in place a particular worker that deals with things that are going to happen in the future that need to be triggered. And effectively, that builds up its scenarios from the events and then keeps track of the triggers and does it in a nice, efficient way. And when the trigger happens, it triggers off whatever's necessary. Like in our case, it's setting objectives to being overdue. They become overdue at a future date. So we want to create an event to push through the system to say there's an overdue happened. And so it just creates that event as a nice, simple example. But it seems a pretty important part of most systems, that timing, that future timing side, which sort of you have to have that on top of an event-driven system to allow for the future triggering things.
There's a kind of a model for that. There's a lot of processes, business processes, who are like, okay, I'm preparing something, I'm doing the work, and then there's some kind of how do you say that? You know, once the work has been done, you have to control that it's going on and going further in its own state. So that's kind of a recurring patterns happening. Typical example I use that is for the invoice. You know, you draft it, you send it, it's done, you send it, but then you have to check that it's going to be paid at the right time. It's kind of the same kind of patterns recurring over time.
Yes. And in our case, it's only used for a few things at the moment, but you can see the sort of usage of that as a product becomes more sophisticated, it will sort of explode to quite a degree.
Yes.
So put quite a lot of effort into trying to make that efficient. We've had a few versions that weren't very efficient, and the latest one is pretty slim in terms of resource usage.
It's quite interesting trying to maintain kind of any level of testing around that as well, isn't it? So when you do change, you know, we've had some fun and games around that area, but that's probably a topic for another day.
Well, testing was an interesting one. We were given a remit of only 6 months to get a product up and running, which is pretty short time scale, with a team of like 6, I think, roughly, of varying skill sets, really. I mean, none of us had done a system and event store. A lot of the team hadn't worked with microservices. So that there was a lot of education involved in that as well, and a lot of resistance from people not used to stuff and not liking the new stuff and feeling comfortable with how it worked before, sort of thing. Naturally, so it was quite, but it was great fun. It was like crazy times, but it was great fun to do.
And how do they look back on that now? I mean, from
they're on board now. Yeah,
they're on board.
Yes.
And I know one of the first one I did, it was like I had a bit of I was ahead of time because I was preparing the active side of the system, and other people were making screens and queries against database, and they were like, yeah, but I need data. No, just create the structure you want, just do whatever, we'll make sure you get the data you need, and don't worry about that. And then, you know, they were like creating fake data to see how the screen interacts, and then sending commands and stuff, and of course the commands didn't do anything because it didn't get. And then we just plugged the two things together, and they were like, what? It works? How come? And they were on board. So but I did shield them. I don't know if it was a good idea, but I did shield them from at first from the active side of the more domain and active side of the thing. It was a small project, so that was doable. But it was really funny when I just, you know, under the hood on our test environment, just started the thing, and then they began to show the data just coming in, and they were like, what's happening now?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, so on the thread of testing, it was quite interesting because we had a remit to do it very fast. So we're like, what can we not do? Can we not test? What's the minimum testing we can do? So we actually decided to just do API testing for the back end, that we sort of acceptance tests. So we were actually sort of running through just the scenarios, which is quite a good way of testing. It was sort of how to use the real APIs to build up different domain objects and then make something happen and then check the results. So it's quite successful for a couple of years.
Yeah.
But because of that, we didn't do much unit testing, even in the code and stuff. And that started to catch up with us, as it inevitably does. And the acceptance test started to get a bit slower. And so as time's gone by now, the world's very different. So a colleague was brought on to do testing primarily. And so now we're doing testing in maybe all the different ways you might think that you're supposed to do testing in an ideal environment. So that's, we got away with just the acceptance testing for a period of time. But, you know, it's always a debt that you have to pay, I think, as your application goes on, which is probably what companies don't realize. You can take a shortcut, but you do have to pay the money eventually. And we've had to pay the money, and we've now got a lot of unit testing in, a lot better coverage, that type of thing. It's quite an interesting learner.
Stubbing out a lot more, so we can, you know, they're not integrated. So you might still, the unit might still be quite big in some instances, but it's not dependent on anything. You know, and as we've gone on, I mean, as we've matured and as we've needed, you know, to increase our confidence and our separation of, you know, our microservices, and that's been key.
Yeah, and I guess I mean, for me on the testing side, the fact that we are dealing with events and streams of information makes it easy to test, actually, for me, because it's like, this is my input, this is what I expect as an output, and right, everything in between is tested by those, you know, this is my scenario for this is the event to expect, or the command or whatever, and get on with it.
Yeah. I mean, on testing with EventStore, we took the Event Store framework we used was actually one by, what's his name? I can't remember.
How is it called?
Oliver Stone? Is that the guy?
Yep, that's a long time ago. Yeah.
It's sort of an event store or something like that.
And yeah.
Well, we actually took that framework and then hacked it to pieces and put it back together to suit us, so that we use the same sort of framework to build our domain objects and the workers use effectively the same thing to get the streams. We did the framework so you could pass it the all stream or an individual stream, and it would handle things the same way, because there's a separation in your code between all stream and other streams. It's sort of quite frustrating sometimes. So your API wasn't, your code split down. Am I dealing with all stream? Am I dealing with one stream? Which is sort of quite frustrating. And we didn't have testing that for quite a while, but when it came to testing it, we found your embedded version, which was really nice because it was very fast. It could spin up a database very quick and drop it down quickly. So we used that. It did get a bit scuppered by version 20, because recently we went to version 20 and I found that I couldn't embed. There wasn't then an embedded version. I don't know if there is now, but there wasn't the embedded version of it. So I had to change it to use an actual database instead.
Yeah, what you can always do there. And I mean, even if you look at the EventStore code base, we heavily use Docker-based database. And the thing is, if you want to get it fast, you can also just say, okay, just use in memory, so there's no disk I/O or minimal disk I/O to do the work. So that's an option there.
That helped. It was frustrating in one sense, because we logically then because with the embedded, you could spin up event store so fast, you could just clear down and create the event store for every single test. And then when we went to the embedded, we had to rewrite it to not have dependencies between data, because it wasn't efficient to stop and start the database every time. So that caused a bit of code burn. I don't know why you guys didn't support embedded still. I don't know if there's a fundamental technical thing or
mainly because we moved from, or we are moving slowly from TCP based communication to gRPC one, and also the fact that we can run on virtually any platform because of gRPC, and we have clients in not only in .NET world. Makes it interesting to have an in-memory database that would run inside a Go runtime, or a Rust runtime, or Java runtime, or so we. I'm not going to say things, but if it's going to happen, but that's certain. I mean, there are a few challenges to make that work again.
I mean,
might
you
come
guys,
back or not. I'm
of course, I usually support.
CTO needs to.
And your support came back saying, well, what you support really is using Docker is the nearest thing. So it's clearly a mindset change that it's not easy to support at the moment. So we're able to make our stuff work, of course, as we do. It was just a bit of a surprise. But interestingly, your support's been really good, actually. So we've got like next day support, but you get to us the next day pretty much. We haven't had to use you too much in desperation. We've never had a corruption, to be fair. When projections were early, we did have projections falling over and the projection system having trouble. But it was in preview, so we couldn't complain about it. But it never brought the database down, and that was okay. But I mean, the only reason that we could go to EventStore in the first place is because you offer a support contract, because our business would not want to buy something that didn't have a support contract. So it's one of the things in the discussion is it was important you offered one in those early days. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to go with you.
Well, we still offer a support contract.
Yes. And I use it quite a lot. I used to use Google Streams to try and keep up with things. There's the Google group. But the Google group's gone now. It's just a legacy, and you've got your new discussion groups and quite better organised there actually, and quite clearly on your website now. But they were very helpful for getting through and stopping asking stupid questions. But I do raise a lot of stupid questions to you guys still, because the documentation, well, it's been pretty poor in the past. It's improving greatly in the last year and a half. Maybe 2 years. Ooh. I keep thinking of timescales without lockdown in.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
the 2
everybody
years of
does.
lockdown.
Everybody does.
It's very strange.
Yeah. Oh, we still have a lot to do on documentation side, that's for sure.
Yeah, documentation is hard to do well. So I keep finding gaps in it and asking questions.
Send them over, just make an
Yes.
issue on GitHub and because they need to be sorted out.
Well, I tend to hope my support calls will initiate something.
So don't hesitate there because there's a gap, and we know also that we need some kind of self-paced kit to, okay, this is what we're going to achieve in few steps. This is how you I don't know, append data, work into a state, and going towards more complex processing as well, because there's a lot that needs to be done there. So yeah, that's part of my job actually. It's to make.
Yes, that has improved a lot. The interesting thing that was a gap really was in a way that I was sort of surprised that in the sense that you didn't offer a recommended starting point for a sort of framework around using it. For example, creation of a domain object is a pretty fundamental thing to most people, but you don't have any proposal on the site or recommendation of anything to use or an example yourself to use that might be reasonably resilient or anything like that. So I feel like you're focusing on the core event store very well. Some of your competitors try and offer more of an ecosystem.
Yeah, but that's slowly coming. But again, first, the basic, you said it yourself. I've used the documentation also since version 3, and you had to want to use the database to go to that documentation. So I totally understand. But yeah, there's a lot of improvements there that have been done. There's room for more, and room for more type of content, but that will come. That's in the never-ending to-do list.
Yes, yeah, it's always good to focus on your core product and keep a continual focus on it. That's true.
Yeah, that's one interesting thing, by the way, that to-do list, because that's one stream of things that needs to be done in the future that never gets smaller.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been trying to accept deleting potential ideas in our lists and stuff like that lately. I hate it, but
we have regular conversations about that, but it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and you can't see the wood for the trees in it.
And how do you divide between the obviously most important things you have to do and all the little things that you need to do? Because the big things always seem to be prioritized above, but all the little things that need to be done, how do you sneak those in? Because they need to be done, otherwise they create crazy things. You've got to keep fixing the small things. Yeah, well, project management.
Yeah, that's Chris' work.
Yeah, I just argue for what I want more.
Yeah, we're almost by the end of our time. We should.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, time flies. And some other thing you would want to tell people, because you said, okay, we made the mistake, between quotes, of not thinking about data life cycle of data, and other things. You'd say, hey, if you want to go into event sourcing, you might bump into this, so think about it beforehand or something.
Yeah, trying to think of what's unique about it that it offers that other things don't. It's the partial replay, where we can say, give us this domain model, but from a year ago, give us from this point in time, which is very interesting. It's sort of one of the cells. It wasn't the cell that made it for us, but we utilized it in one feature where when somebody closes their review, there's a closure date. And it's supposed to be fixed at that date. Okay, but some of the things it references might be ongoing things that keep changing. But what we can do, we can simply do a query and say restricted by this date, and we get the exact data at the exact time that was closed, which quite. So we just all we do is add in the date. So when we come to displaying that review that's closed, we can do that. But the domain object has actually moved on, and some of the things it points to might have been updated in various ways since, but you can see it at the point in time, or see it as it is now.
Yep.
which is quite nice. The point in time thing is very good and not easy to do with a SQL database because they don't. It would sort of have to be indexed in a SQL database in a fundamental way by the database to do it well. Otherwise, you put in dates everywhere. It's sort of a bit mad. I've had fun trying to design architecture to do that, but it comes in EventStore virtually for free.
Yeah. Let's be honest. With events, you have dates everywhere as well.
Yes.
Because, it's time.
But the beauty is, if you're replaying a stream, if you put the date on it, you just replay the stream until that point, and boom, you've got everything to that point in history.
Yep.
So it's really nice. Another one's pointed out is that we've successfully. I am amazed about one particular aspect, which is that when we read back a stream, we read back the entire stream. Okay, I fully expected us to have to be caching that by now.
Yeah.
So 6 years down the line, we still don't cache.
Yeah, no read.
We're still reading every stream, every event, every time.
I call this our dirty little secret.
No read model at all. Then I mean persisted one.
Persisted, yeah, no. We have obviously we stream data out for reporting purposes, so into an optimized data warehouse outside the transactional system. But in terms of the actual application,
that's which amazes me that we can. It's nice because it's simpler. Because as soon as you have to put the extra layer on, you get more complexity. But we've managed to keep that and still not got a problem. So I'm actually amazed about that one.
It's not a lot of people do that, but that should be in my opinion, the default. You begin with that, and then you have enough measure. You have some kind of observation that says, okay, now is the time to think about caching it or doing differently. But that should be the starting point of it, not trying to cache by default.
Because I feel bad because it's like everybody says yes, and you have to have read models, and it's like we haven't had to yet.
But you have. That's just
my
not
brain keeps saying, but we've got to put in read models. And like, but we don't need them yet.
Yeah. No, I think that's an important point, Yves. Yeah, we do have them. We just don't persist them. Yeah. So we don't have the eventual as much of the eventual consistency and to work around, etc.
Latency. Don't say eventual consistency. That scares people off. Latency.
Hey, I thought this was a technical talk. We're not worried about scaring people, are we? This isn't for business people. Oh, sorry.
But the thing is, once you frame it right, there's a few points that allow what you say is good stream design, because if you have never-ending streams that contains millions and millions of events, that's not possible anymore. But that's kind of what you said about thinking about the temporal aspect. How can you partition or shard this information into different streams, and but that requires a bit of analysis and playing around with streams, and that allows that kind of non-feature. I don't have read models. Persisted read model is a non-feature. That's a nice one.
Yes. And if we're running out of time, there's a couple more maybe hints for people that might help them. One is that when you don't rely on the event store date, the event date from EventStore, very, very important. Always store your own date in the event, because, for example, when we migrate from the old database to the new, the event, the EventStore date time becomes that you pushed it into the new migration. If you've been relying on that for your point in time in the history for when that event happened.
Game over.
True.
So that's one we managed to not fall foul of. We realized that in the first place.
Yeah.
That's a pretty important one. So make sure your events are independent and not relying on anything external. It can be easy. It's an easy temptation to do that wrong without thinking about it.
Yeah, that actually I'm going to note it. I think we have an item on that to-do list to say don't rely on that for business reasons. That timestamp there. And anyway, time is strange because you have to think about time and the granularity and that kind of stuff. So I see a lot of people using date times where they care about the date.
Yeah.
So that's kind of an interesting topic in and out of itself. Time.
Yeah, date times are hard.
Yeah.
Yes.
Depending on where you are and when.
Yep.
Yes.
Any other quick tips?
Oh, nothing massive.
What about the Dave? What about the? I guess we've spent quite a lot of effort in what we call soft restarts. So when our subscriptions, that was a bit of a learning point for us, I guess.
True. Yes. You've got this frustrating decision you made that when you've got a subscription, if it gets overloaded because you're processing it too slow, the server would effectively bath the subscription. It would become overloaded and you get a subscription
Close
too
it,
large,
basically,
type message. It was sort of frustrating because that came down to a decision made. Well, if it's too slow, you've got to sort that out, haven't you? Because it's too slow. But that decision making didn't allow for the fact you may have a wave where there's a huge amount of events, and then it eases off.
Yep.
So it was frustrating, and then we had to put a whole restart mechanism to recreate the subscription because it would fall over in a way it didn't work anymore, and it wouldn't automatically reconnect. So it's just like, So we had to put in a soft restart mechanism, which and try and make the storage on the client side put a really high number on how many events it can have. But that didn't really help that much. But fundamentally, the problem was that it wasn't holding back on the server and negotiating nicely with the client. So is that the same with gRPC?
Yeah, fundamentally it didn't change, but there might be improvement in the future where you have more, where you will get control messages basically inside. We're not sure yet exactly how we're going to surface that, but there are possibilities to have control message to tell you exactly from a consumer point of view, oh, this is happening on the server, or that is happening, and which might make it easier to have those reconnection and
It strikes me,
have a bit more control.
I know it's a philosophy to say your client's too slow, but it seems a bit heavyweight not to have a dual mode where it can just like wait. Why can't it be nice and just wait? So that caused extra code for us.
I guess in the short term it won't disappear.
Yeah,
but the code is in place and it's the same. I mean, if you're on the TCP client and the gRPC, it's kind of similar. So it's not that fundamental change.
So while we're machine gunning at the end as well, then we'll get another one in. Scavenge is a very interesting aspect. So we had the Scavenge, we ran it every day, and then it was taking more than a day. We ran it every few days, then it took longer, then it got up to a week, it was getting past a week, and we stopped running it, partly because the statistics used to be created in the database, and so that used to be constantly, not constantly because they're cleaning themselves down, but it was constantly increasing the size. So with the statistics out, we don't actually clear up any streams because we're still not doing that clear up side of it. So we don't necessarily need it running at the moment, but you have just introduced the incremental scavenge possibility where you can start it from a certain point, which we did look at the algorithm for using that, but decided not to implement it for now because it's not too much.
It's on that list.
It's on that list.
But that's totally possible to.
We're waiting till something really needs
from chunk numbers or chunk being the database file itself.
The other interesting one is you've got to be very careful with scavenging when it runs because it really does hog performance. So you've got to be very careful about that. And running it for a whole week, like, was getting crazy. It was just like madness. Like the scavenge is just madness. The other one is you've got to be careful because don't run your backups at the same time as scavenge for sure, because scavenge can be sort of changing the context of your backups. Because we looked at that in particular detail lately, and you've got that as the advice from your documentation now, which is quite good.
It's going to be improved shortly, by the way, to have more depending on the type of backups you want, but we will also provide guidance about incremental backups. So you have your target, you have an initial backup, and then only the changes will be effectively need to be copied over. without corrupting your backup.
Well, I've just asked you a question.
That's the primary thing.
Because we're trying to do sync backups where you don't have to rewrite the same thing if it hasn't been changed.
Yep.
But your backup recommendation doesn't include the ability to delete things that have been removed from the event store, which is interesting. I just asked you a question. There's a current support call about
that's coming. We're trying to break it, that algorithm, to see if it's correct, and trying to break it to make it not work, but we're not successful yet, which is good. But that will come. That will come.
Yeah, so I mean, we thought it worked like that for the last whatever months, and for quite a long time. And I think I've just realised recently that we might have to be copying all the files every time rather than doing the sync. So that's coming out in the wash.
Yep.
So quick machine gun. Yeah, the other interesting one, wasn't it, Chris, was dirty reads, or as we call it.
Oh, yeah.
It's a very interesting scenario where you have a domain object with its one connection to the event store, and you have your worker process that is talking to a separate connection to the event store, which could be a different node on the cluster.
Yep.
And when the domain gets written to and the worker gets alerted, there's a possible, if the worker actually tries to talk to a domain API, that domain API may have another connection to a database, to a different node again. And there's a possibility where the domain's been updated on this node, the worker's got the alert, but when it goes to get the domain from that node hasn't got that update yet.
Yeah.
Because we were very excited. First of all, we had everything running off master, so you had complete consistency. Then quite a long time ago, we switched to your mode where you can read from all the nodes, either node, which really helped performance, of course, for reads. But we didn't realize we'd introduced ourselves to the risk of this dirty read scenario. It took us a long, long time to realize that. And it was only when we had a few support calls and we were puzzling about what had happened that we realized what was going on. And we talked to you about that. And you have lessened the chances of it quite a lot with V20. There's done some work on that.
There's been some work. Might still happen because you still have the consensus, and the consensus is still on the majority of nodes. So when I'm appending data to the leader node, a majority of node will act and then say, okay, it's persisted on the majority of node. But if you happen to read it on a node that's not yet updated, that might happen. But the trick there, and that's general trick, those revision numbers you get when you append something, that's something that needs to be passed along, because it helps a lot to make sure that, okay, I'm getting a trigger because that stream is at revision number 10. I'm reading that stream and I'm only seeing now. So back off 1 millisecond and go back 10 to do the work. So that number, that revision number is key to having a good system that is in general, that is
flexible and
flexible and resilient as well.
So I thought we'd only have to get into passing those around when it came to read models, but this is probably a use case that we will have to do.
Because they are read models, right? Basically, really.
I suppose.
It's just they're not persisted.
Yeah, they are, and you can even use them as ZTAG if you on HTTP. So there's a lot of goodies that you can do with that. That's for me. That's one of the things with the product we offer, is that number is that comes automatically increasing, and it helps a lot in lots of scenario. Out of ordering also can be, or missing. You miss some notification. You can get around just fixing that by using that number to know, okay, no, I do need to read that because I missed some, or this is not in order, so I'm going to read it from the source. There's a lot of
that is a good way. Yeah, that's a good way to solve it. The interesting thing is, though, when we turned on that switch to do the reading from all the nodes, nobody told us that this was a side effect.
Yeah.
That was the thing. We're like, what? We never knew this.
Yeah, maybe I need to make a note for a documentation. No,
when
you guys are making my list longer. You know that?
Oh no!
It's one of those things which
it doesn't matter what you write.
Yeah. It's one of those things though, which when you look at it in hindsight, you go, well, of course, that's obvious, isn't it? But when you're in the heat of the moment doing it, you think, oh, you're trying to solve a different problem. And it's like, oh, this is fantastic.
Yeah. My apologies for that.
Yeah, it's all your fault. Yeah.
Yes, I'm the public face also.
Everyone needs a fall guy.
Yeah, you get paid for that, so fun. I think every team needs an official scapegoat role, isn't it?
Oh, I don't think so, but
as you can tell, Dave's a real team player.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the noisy part then.
So the last one is that just be aware of startup times with EventStore. So we've decided to keep it starting up with checking its integrity each time it starts up, which inevitably takes time. Yeah, so we're probably up to about 45 minutes to an hour startup time, which we're aware you can reduce by not doing those integrity checks. Just seems a good idea to do them if you can, though. But that does affect. We have to be quite careful when we're doing some upgrades and things like that, and be aware of that window.
Yep.
So that's just a thing of having a lot of data.
Yep, and again, that's actively being worked on.
Yes,
those are pain points that we're dramatically aware of. So yeah, there's work. That's one of the things I don't know. We just had a release recently, and there's something called log v3, which is experimental. So don't use it in production just yet, please. Where that kind of thing will be better.
It's interesting because it's like the whole history of dealing with this type of architecture is a history of dealing with a longer and longer and longer list.
Yep.
It's literally the consequences of dealing with that.
Yep.
And trying to work out how you can clear it down without losing the list in a funny sort of way.
Yeah. Without losing the value.
And I feel that like your company has moved on throughout the time as we've been using the product and as we've needed different things, you've been delivering sort of in reasonable time as you've been evolving.
Yep.
But it's good to see that actually your company's exploded now, so you're really going for a lot of different things.
Yeah, thanks.
It seems like you've got some good funding in there, and you're really now tackling a lot more things like that. I think the performance gains you're going to do, I think you're going to go ahead of us now. Instead of feeling like, just in time, getting there for us. It feels like you're going a long way ahead.
Yeah, there's thank you. That is the work of a lot of people behind the scene who most people don't see. So it's thank you. What can I say? Thanks. But things move forward. There's been maybe just one thing. I've talked recently to someone who said, "Oh, that's strange because EventStore seems feature complete," and I'm like, no. There is room for improvement, a lot more. And things have changed. The way people build systems have changed, so we need to evolve as well and make sure people are successful with the product and event sourcing in general. So that's kind of the. So again, thank you for all the hard work that other people did behind the scene, because
I particularly like your auto tuning stuff. Like now you're getting the data with your cloud service, where you're realizing where you can auto tune. So I've been able to take out some parameters in version 20 that are auto set now to good settings. So that's really nice, because traditionally we didn't get too much support there. It's like
still keep an eye on the performance and so on, because it's still a best effort, and in really special cases it might not be the most performant one. But again, this is kind of okay. Indeed, that's getting more information allows to do that kind of optimization. So
I better stop. I'll keep going.
Yes, we need to stop. Thanks a lot. That was really interesting, and we certainly should do something more about that testing stuff because I think we need to discuss if you don't test everything all the time. That's not something I'm kidding. But thanks a lot for your time and for the kind words.
Thank you.